It was December 1944. The trees of the Ardennes stood like skeletal sentinels beneath a sky heavy with snow. The wind bit sharp and cold, sweeping flakes sideways across the frozen earth. Beneath a camouflage net, inside a frost-bitten M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, Private First Class Ray Thompson peered through a fogged periscope. His breath came in short bursts, his gloved hands trembling, not from fear, but from the relentless chill that crept through steel, skin, and bone. 800 yards away, a column of German tanks crawled through the forest. 12 vehicles in all, mostly Panzer IVs, led by a single Tiger I. Behind them came half-tracks packed with infantry and fuel trucks rolling steady at the rear. Their objective was clear: a vital crossroads. If taken, it would sever the supply line to the 101st Airborne Division, already encircled in Bastogne. Thompson had no orders, no clearance to fire. He'd been told only to observe, to wait, to report. But he saw what was coming. And in that frozen stillness, he made a choice. Without a command, without permission. Ray Thompson pulled the trigger. And in that instant, everything changed. 3 days earlier, in a drafty farmhouse near the Belgian front, Ray Thompson sat hunched over a cold metal desk as his commanding officer briefed the crew of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. "No one fires without confirmation from command," the officer said flatly. "I don't care what you see. I don't care how close they are. We do not give away our position unless ordered." The room was silent. Helmets rested on knees. The men nodded, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Everyone knew the enemy was advancing. Fast. Outside, the Battle of the Bulge had just begun. On December 16th, under a shroud of fog and snow, the German army launched its final massive offensive on the Western Front, Operation Watch on the Rhine. The goal was brutally simple: split the Allied line, capture Antwerp, force a peace. They struck with over 200,000 men, more than 1,000 tanks, and total surprise. American lines buckled, units disappeared overnight, positions changed by the hour, and in the chaos, fear spread, not just of the Germans ahead, but of friendly fire behind. So the rule was carved in stone: wait for orders. For Thompson, that meant observation duty. He and his three-man crew were dug into a ridge north of Neuville, overlooking a forest road leading toward Bastogne. They had good cover, perfect range, and an icy view of the valley below. But no permission to engage. Day and night, Thompson scanned the horizon. Through his frost-rimmed scope, he logged tracks, bearings, wind speeds, sketching everything in a small notebook his mother had mailed months earlier. He recorded details like a scientist, but never fired. Once, he tracked a lone Panzer near a ravine for nearly an hour. The order never came. It passed. The anger burned, but discipline held. One wrong shot could reveal their position and invite a storm of artillery in reply. Yet as the hours dragged on, and the forest filled with the groan of enemy engines, a question began to form in his mind. Was silence really safer? Thompson wasn't reckless. He was deliberate. He studied German movement like an engineer studies blueprints. He knew their spacing, their rhythm, their reliance on order. And he knew, when the time came, exactly where to strike. He just didn't know yet that he'd be the one to make the call. Raymond Charles Thompson wasn't born a soldier. He came from the flat sweep of western Kansas, where winter wind could peel paint off a barn and summer heat baked wheat fields until they cracked like overdone bread. His father, Charles, ran a small engine repair shop. His mother, Anna, taught 7th grade math. Ray to a few, grew up among gears, grease, and graph paper. He saw the world in angles. As a boy, he could gauge the height of a grain silo from the length of its shadow. While other kids shot tin cans with slingshots, Ray built one with pulleys and counterweights, testing just how far precision could send a pebble. He didn't enlist for glory. In 1942, he joined the Army because it offered engineering training, a steady wage, and maybe a future. The training came. The pay was thin. The future depended on living through Europe. By Normandy, he was 22 and looked 30. His first fights were in the hedgerows, where an enemy could be 10 feet away and invisible until the muzzle flash. He watched Jimmy Delgado burn when a Panzer shell caught their half-track in a ditch. Frank Murray stepped on a mine outside St. Lo and vanished in a white blast. After that, Ray stopped believing in luck, or in the notion of safe distance. He believed in patterns. He learned how tanks paused, how long turrets took to traverse, where armor thinned, where crews hesitated. He carried a spiral notebook in his jacket and sketched every German vehicle he saw, annotating vulnerabilities and blind arcs. He didn't talk much. Men called him the quiet clock, because when he spoke, it was brief, exact, and timed to the second. At the gun, he was lethal without theatrics. Not fast, not flashy, precise. To the Army, he was a model gunner, disciplined, steady, unshakable under fire. What they missed, what even his crew only half saw, was the strategist under the steel helmet. Ray Thompson wasn't just a trigger man. He read a battlefield like a chessboard. And in 3 days' time, that quiet Kansan with his angle-driven mind would upend the rules of engagement in a single burst of fire. Because war doesn't always reward obedience. Sometimes it rewards the man who knows exactly when to break the rule. Morning, December 19th, 1944. Fog lay low over the Ardennes, clinging to branches like smoke. Sound warped, vision narrowed. Through the periscope, Ray saw it. The unmistakable outline of a Tiger I, long barrel, squared shoulders, a Predator in steel. Then more shapes behind it. A German column slid down the forest road like a serpent of armor. 12 vehicles, maybe more. Textbook formation, tight spacing, disciplined pace. The Tiger punched the path up front. 3 Panzer IVs followed, quick, efficient, lethal. 2 half-tracks, infantry packed in. Behind them, the lifeblood. Ammo trucks, fuel tankers, field kitchens. The tail carried a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, a tell that they expected contact and thought they were ready for it. The road was narrow, hemmed by steep banks and thick trunks. No room to fan out, no room to turn quick. To most eyes, it was a route. To Thompson, it was a bottle, waiting for a cork. But he had no orders. Radio to forward HQ was a smear of static, weak, garbled, sometimes dead. To reach command, he'd have to shift positions and risk exposure. Protocol said, observe, report, let artillery or air do the work. Only he wasn't watching a column in transit. He was watching a blade drawn to the Noville crossroads. If the Germans seized it, they'd hook around and bite into Bastogne from the north. The already encircled 101st Airborne would lose its last meaningful supply artery. Catastrophe. Tens of thousands stranded in ice and hunger. The column kept rolling, calm, confident, shielded by the belief that American units were scattered, slow, and too thin to respond. They were half right. Thompson was cold. He was scared. He was isolated, but he wasn't scattered. He was computing. Fire too early. They scatter into cover. Hit the wrong vehicle. The rest either ram forward or back out and bring crushing return fire. But fire in a sequence. The right targets, in the right order, and he could do what most officers would call impossible. Unravel an armored column piece by piece. No green light, no backup, no permission. Ray wet his lips, set elevation, took one last read of the formation, and waited for the moment no manual teaches. Then the unauthorized pattern began. Ray Thompson had never once fired without orders. Not in drills, not in France, not when instinct whispered, "now," days before. But staring at that perfect German column, steel crawling through fog like clockwork, he realized something fundamental. Waiting wasn't caution anymore. Waiting was suicide. So, with no radio contact, no clearance, and no one to back him up, Ray adjusted the angle, steadied his breath, and fired. He didn't target the lead tank. He aimed for the third. The armor-piercing round tore from the M10 Wolverine's barrel with a thunderous crack, a concussion that shattered the silence and sent snow erupting skyward. It slammed into the third Panzer IV, punching through its flank. The blast threw smoke, fire, and twisted steel across the trees. The column froze. Confusion. Shouting. But Thompson was already moving. His loader rammed in another shell. Thompson shifted the Wolverine 10 yards left, just enough to fool anyone scanning for muzzle flash, then fired again. This time, the shell struck the sixth vehicle, a half-track. The explosion was instant. Fire bloomed. Bodies hurled skyward. Burning fuel splattered the snow. The underbrush caught, the forest glowing orange through the fog. The Tiger up front tried to reverse, crew shouting over radio static, but the line behind was too tight. They couldn't move forward, couldn't back out. A perfect trap, born of their own discipline. Thompson reloaded. His crew now fully awake, eyes wide, hands moving in rhythm. No questions, no hesitation. He took aim at the eighth vehicle, a fuel truck. The shot hit dead on. The explosion was biblical. The fuel tank ignited with a roar that rolled through the valley. The fireball rose high enough to light the forest canopy. The force of it knocked German infantry to the ground and silhouetted the tanks in ghostly black against the inferno. To distant ears, it sounded like an entire battery had opened fire. But it was one man, one gun, and a single act of defiance. Yet there was nothing random in Thompson's pattern. It was geometry and logic, not luck. The third shot blocked the front. The sixth broke the middle. The eighth ignited the rear, a surgical dismantling of German formation strategy. Each shell a scalpel, not a hammer. The Germans, blinded by smoke and panic, began firing wildly into the trees, machine guns chewing through snowbanks and empty trunks, infantry scattered, yelling, tripping over frozen roots. To them, it wasn't a single gunner. It was a ghost battery. Moments before, the Ardennes had been silent. Now it screamed. Trees splintered under shockwaves. Fire and shrapnel filled the air like confetti from hell. Thompson's third shell set off another fuel truck. His fourth hit a half-track trying to reverse, lifting it into the air before crashing it sideways into a burning Panzer. The Tiger at the head of the line, stuck, boxed in, tried desperately to pivot, but there was nowhere to go. The narrow road that had once been their shield now became a steel graveyard. From his ridge, Thompson watched chaos unfold in slow motion. Soldiers shouting, flames reflecting off helmets, snow stained black, infantrymen bolting into the woods. One officer climbed a tank for a better view, only to be cut down by Thompson's .50 caliber coaxial burst. Inside the Wolverine, the crew was drenched in sweat despite the cold. The loader's gloves were burned through, his hands raw. The assistant gunner's voice cracked from shouting coordinates. The smell was gunpowder, oil, and smoke. But Thompson stayed ice calm. Every shot, every reposition came from calculation, not adrenaline. After every 2 rounds, he moved the tank, 10 yards here, 20 there, just enough to confuse the enemy's line of fire. Smoke and fog masked his movements. The terrain did the rest. The Germans fired blind, convinced they were trapped in a multi-unit ambush. Some claimed 4 tanks, others said 8. Reports later spoke of American artillery batteries in the hills. None existed. The truth? One M10 Wolverine. 3 men. One mind making math of war. After 30 minutes, the road was choked with wreckage. 5 tanks destroyed, 3 more crippled, the rest abandoned. Finally, the Tiger managed to turn its turret toward the ridge, aiming right where Thompson had last fired. He didn't flinch. He waited. He knew the Tiger's armor by heart, thickest in the front, weakest on the sides, and when that turret turned just enough to expose its flank, Ray fired. The shell hit home. A flash, then a roar. The Tiger's turret blew skyward in a molten arc, landing yards away. The explosion knocked the rear anti-aircraft gun off balance. Its crew fled into the trees. Smoke rolled low across the ground now, mixing with snow and firelight. The road that had once carried German armor was now a corridor of twisted steel and silence. One of Thompson's crewmen looked at him, stunned. "Are we still getting court-martialed for this?" Thompson didn't answer. He just loaded another round, because the job wasn't finished yet. Hours later, under interrogation in a makeshift American holding tent, a captured German lieutenant sat trembling, face smeared with ash, coat half burned, eyes wide and vacant. "There were many guns," he said in broken English. "Maybe 6, maybe more. We were attacked by a full battery." The American officers exchanged puzzled looks. There had been no battery, not even a platoon. Only one M10 Wolverine and one gunner who had fired without permission. Other prisoners told conflicting stories. Some swore it was an ambush laid by American paratroopers with bazookas. Others said the forest was mined, the explosions chained together by booby traps. One young soldier, barely 20, claimed he saw muzzle flashes from 3 different directions, an illusion born from Thompson's habit of shifting position after every shot. In the smoke, chaos, and broken communication, the Germans invented enemies that didn't exist. Fear filled in the blanks. Even veteran tank commanders reported seeing American armor deeper in the woods, shapes in the fog that vanished when they fired. They weren't cowards. They simply couldn't comprehend that one man had done this, because by their doctrine, it was impossible. No single gunner could have timed his shots so precisely, crippled a column so completely, or vanished so quickly. It defied their logic. It defied their training. When American forces arrived hours later to clear the road, what they found looked less like a battle and more like the aftermath of an airstrike. Twisted frames, scorched steel, trees ripped open by heat, frozen bodies sprawled across snow. But one detail stood out. There were no American dead, and so the Germans gave it a name. They called it Die Geisterbatterie, the Ghost Battery. For 48 hours, Ray Thompson waited for punishment. When the smoke cleared, when the last echo of artillery faded, he sat motionless inside the Wolverine, hands numb, face blank. His loader passed him a canteen. He didn't drink. The adrenaline had burned out, replaced by the cold realization that he'd broken direct orders. Back at headquarters, Thompson filed his report. His commanding officer, Captain Langston, read it silently, eyes scanning the sketches, the range estimates, the sequence diagrams. His jaw tightened. "You know," Langston said finally, "if this had gone wrong, if even one of those was friendly fire—" "I know what I saw," Thompson replied. Langston studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "No one authorized this, Thompson. You understand that?" "I do." Langston didn't reprimand him. Not yet. He just said, "Get some rest. I'll send this upstairs." Upstairs meant division command, which meant investigation, which usually meant punishment. Thompson rejoined his crew. No celebration, no laughter, just silence and waiting. But the hammer never fell, because something else happened first. 2 days later, scouts from the 101st Airborne arrived through Noville. Their faces were hollow, uniforms crusted with frost. They'd expected that forest road to be crawling with German armor. Instead, they found a graveyard of tanks. They asked which unit had done it. Langston said simply, "It wasn't a unit." It was one gunner word spread faster than orders. In mess tents, along supply lines, over crackling radios, soldiers began whispering about the man from Kansas who'd taken out a Panzer column by himself. Stories grew with every retelling. 10 tanks destroyed, 5 shells, bouncing shots like a pool player. But beneath the myth, an investigation was quietly underway. Division intelligence combed through Thompson's notes, interviewed his loader and gunner, checked the radio logs. They found no record of him ever receiving an order, because the lines had been jammed. He had tried to report. Nothing came back. And yet his results were undeniable. 7 enemy vehicles destroyed, 4 more disabled, 0 American casualties, 1 vital road held. A decision made in silence had kept an entire division alive. When Langston received the final verdict, he expected a reprimand. Instead, the division commander told him, "Don't put this in the official report. Not yet. But tell your gunner. We'll be watching his work." No medal, no ceremony, but no court-martial either. Instead, Thompson was quietly assigned to train other gunners, teaching them how to disable convoys through patterned firing instead of brute force. No one called him a hero. But the Army started taking notes. His diagrams, carefully drawn, meticulously labeled, were sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to the U.S. Army Artillery School. That's when it hit him. They weren't condemning what he'd done. They were studying it. Weeks later, Langston approached him as Thompson cleaned a recoilless rifle. "I was ready to report you for insubordination," the captain admitted. "But then I read that line in your notes, the one about controlled collapse. What did you mean by that?" Thompson wiped his hands on a rag. "When you pull one stone from a wall," he said, "the rest falls, if you know which one to pull." Langston smirked. "Well, next time you decide to knock down a wall, give me a little warning first." Thompson didn't smile. He just nodded. Because to him, it wasn't victory. It was calculation, and he knew. It could have gone the other way. War doesn't always punish disobedience. Sometimes it learns from it. Ray Thompson never asked to be remembered. He didn't keep journals or pose for photos. After the war, he went home to Kansas, married a woman named Helen, and opened a small repair shop near Dodge City. He fixed tractors, built grain silos, and taught his son geometry by scratching angles into the dirt with a stick. He never called himself a hero, but others did. Because years later, the U.S. Army quietly began teaching something called asymmetrical engagement sequencing, a clinical term for a deceptively simple idea. Don't aim for the front, aim for the collapse. The case study they used, a single engagement outside Noville, Belgium. Grainy maps showed a forest road, the wreckage layout, firing arcs, trajectories. No names were listed. The file was unclassified, but buried deep in doctrine manuals few officers ever read. Still, the students at Fort Sill and later Fort Benning studied it. Because it worked, because it saved lives, because it changed the understanding of what one gunner could do, not through firepower, but through geometry, logic, and a willingness to act when orders fell silent. Years later, a colonel who had once studied Thompson's engagement summarized it like this: "He didn't break orders. He operated beyond them. It was the paradox of war. A man who defied command became the blueprint for flexible battlefield thinking. His technique, the sequence strike pattern, was integrated into Cold War doctrine, training tank crews on how to dismantle Soviet armor in Eastern Europe. The concept was simple. Create choke points through selective targeting. Exploit the enemy's own discipline against them. Revolutionary ideas born from one man's logic, a Kansas farm kid who had never been to college. Decades later, a military historian uncovered Thompson's original field report, stamped with a fading red line, buried among thousands of forgotten after-action files. He tracked Thompson down, an old man in his 80s, half-deaf, living quietly with his wife and a cat named Murphy. When asked about that day in the Ardennes, Thompson thought for a long time before answering. "I remember the trees," he said. "How still it was before the first shot, like the whole world was holding its breath." He didn't talk of victory or glory or fear, just precision, just necessity. When asked why he didn't wait for orders, he said simply, "Because by the time the radio worked, it would have been too late." Then, after a pause, he added, "I didn't break the rules. I just stepped past them, long enough to do what had to be done." That line never made it into the official history books, but it stayed with the historian. And maybe now, with you. Ray Thompson didn't win the war. He saved a road. He saved a column of paratroopers. He saved a moment in time. And in war, sometimes that's everything. He reminded the world that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it calculates, and sometimes it pulls the trigger, not out of defiance but out of duty. One gunner, one decision, one pattern, and an entire German column brought to its knees.